My world is defined by the synaptic gap. It is defined by the measurable, the quantifiable, and the observable. I am Dr. Elias Thorne, and for 20 years, I have mapped the geography of the human brain. I have held the seat of consciousness in digital renders, traced the pathways of motor function, and explained away ghosts as misfiring temporal lobes. I believe in electricity, not spirits. I believe in chemistry, not destiny. Or at least I did. Before the dust settled in our living room. Before the smell of Galilee salt filled the house in suburban Seattle. Our life, before the event, was aggressively normal. It was a life curated for peace, perhaps to compensate for the chaos I saw in the emergency ward every day. We lived in a glass and steel structure overlooking the Sound, a modern fortress against the wild. My wife, Sarah, was the warmth to my cold logic. She was an architect, someone who built spaces for people to live, while I studied the organ that allowed them to perceive those spaces. And then there was Leo. Leo was 6. He was quiet, introspective, with eyes that seemed a shade too dark for his pale face. We worried occasionally about his social development. He didn't care for trucks or superheroes. He preferred the texture of things. I remember finding him once in the backyard, just running his hands over the rough bark of the cedar tree, his eyes closed, his breathing synchronized with the wind. "He's just sensitive, Elias," Sarah would say, brushing a stray hair from my forehead as we sat in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only soundtrack to our evening. "He feels things deeply. Like you, even if you pretend you don't." I would scoff gently, sipping my espresso. "I feel what I can diagnose, Sarah. Leo is unique. But healthy. His MRI scans from the migraine check last year were pristine. A perfect brain. A perfect brain." The irony of that phrase now tastes like ash in my mouth. The shift didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a texture. It was a Tuesday evening in November. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the outside world into a blurred watercolor of gray and charcoal. I was in my study, reviewing a case on pediatric epilepsy. The only light came from the warm glow of my brass desk lamp and the blue hue of my monitor. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain. I heard the footsteps first. Soft, padded sounds against the hardwood hallway. I turned, expecting a request for water or a complaint about a monster in the closet. Leo stood in the doorway. He was wearing his blue cotton pajamas with the rocket ships on them. But his posture was wrong. A 6-year-old slumps, they lean, they fidget. Leo stood with a terrifying stillness, his spine straight, his hands clasped loosely behind his back in a gesture that looked decades too old for his small frame. "Leo?" I asked, swiveling my chair. "Everything okay, bud?" He didn't look at me. He looked past me, toward the window where the rain was hammering the glass. "The water is too loud," he whispered. "It's just a storm, Leo. It'll pass." "No," he said, and his voice lacked the nasal pitch of childhood. It was lower, breathy, like wind moving through dry reeds. "Not the rain. The sea. The sea is angry tonight. We shouldn't have launched the boat." I paused, my pen hovering over my notepad. "We don't have a boat, Leo." He blinked, and for a second, the strange maturity vanished. He looked at me, confused, as if waking from a micro-sleep. "Daddy? I'm here." I stood up and walked over to him, kneeling to check his temperature. My hand against his forehead felt cool skin. No fever. Pupils reactive. "You were sleepwalking, kiddo. Dreaming about boats?" "I guess," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Can I have some water?" Not salt water. Sweet water. Tap water coming right up." I smiled, guiding him toward the kitchen. I rationalized it immediately. Hypnagogic hallucination. Common in children his age during growth spurts. The brain lingers between REM sleep and wakefulness, leaking dream imagery into reality. It was a textbook explanation. It was safe. It fit into a box. But later that night, after I tucked him back in, I went downstairs to the kitchen to clean up a spilled glass. That's when I saw it. Leo had been drawing at the kitchen island before bed. Usually, he drew abstract shapes or the family cat. But on the heavy cardstock paper I had bought him, there was something else. He had used charcoal, a messy medium we rarely let him use. It wasn't a stick figure. It was a landscape. But not the evergreen forests of Washington. It was a sketch of a shoreline, drawn with a frantic, intense energy. There were nets, ancient, heavy nets, draped over wooden beams. And in the distance, sketched with surprising grasp of perspective, was a boat. A distinct, low-hulled fishing vessel with a single mast. The style wasn't the scribble of a child. It looked like an architectural study, detailed and grim. But it was the smell that stopped me. I leaned down to look closer at the drawing. The paper didn't smell like charcoal or wax crayons. I sniffed again, my heart doing a strange, irregular thud in my chest. The paper smelled of fish. Raw, briny fish. An old, sun-baked wood. I looked around the sterile, Lysol-scrubbed kitchen. We hadn't eaten seafood in weeks. The smell was emanating from the drawing, as if the charcoal itself had been soaked in the ocean of a different time. I touched the paper. It was dry. Impossible, I whispered to the empty room. That was the first crack in the glass. The first sign that the laws of physics I worshipped were about to be suspended. I spent an hour that night scrubbing the kitchen island. I used bleach, lemon oil, abrasive pads. I scrubbed until the granite dulled and my knuckles turned red. I told myself the smell was a sensory hallucination, a phantom scent triggered by a synapse firing in the olfactory bulb. Stress, I diagnosed myself. Simple stress. By morning, the smell was gone. The kitchen smelled of coffee and toast, the perfume of domestic normalcy. Sarah was humming as she packed Leo's lunchbox. The sun was out, piercing through the Seattle gray, casting long, sharp beams of light across the hardwood. It was blindingly bright, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Leo sat at the table. He looked small. Normal. He was pushing scrambled eggs around his plate with a fork. "Eat up, Leo," Sarah said, kissing the top of his head. "School bus in 10. I watched him over the rim of my mug. I was looking for the stranger I had seen in the doorway the night before. I was looking for the posture, the heaviness. But he was just a boy again. "Did you sleep okay, Leo?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He looked up, blinking against the harsh morning light. "Yes, Daddy." "No dreams? About boats?" He frowned, a genuine, confused crease between his brows. "No. I dreamed about my shoes. I lost one." I exhaled. The tension in my shoulders, which I hadn't realized I was holding, released. It was just a night terror, I told myself. Just a glitch. But then, he did it. Sarah placed a basket of bread rolls on the table, sourdough, fresh from the oven. Leo reached out. He didn't grab a roll and bite into it like a hungry 6-year-old. He took the bread in both hands. He held it up for a second, his eyes closing, his face tilting upward toward the ceiling light. It was a gesture of reverence. Absolute, practiced reverence. Then, with a fluid motion that seemed practiced over a lifetime, he tore the bread in half. Crack. The sound was too loud in the quiet kitchen. It wasn't the sound of soft dough tearing. It sounded like dry, unleavened bread snapping. He handed half to me. "Take," he said. "Not here you go, not want some. Take." His eyes were open now. They weren't dark brown. For a fleeting second, in that trick of the light, they looked like amber. Ancient amber. I took the bread. My hand was trembling. "Thanks, bud," I managed to say. He smiled, and the moment broke. He shoved the other half in his mouth, chewed with his mouth open, and grabbed his backpack. "Bye, Dad!" "Bye, Mom!" He ran out the door. The screen door slammed shut. I sat there, holding the piece of warm sourdough, feeling a cold sweat prickle at the base of my neck. I looked at the bread. I couldn't eat it. I felt unworthy? No, that was ridiculous. I felt watched. I dropped the bread into the waste bin. That was the last normal morning. That was the end of the life we had built. The escalation began 72 hours later. As a neurologist, I categorize pathology by progression: linear, exponential, episodic. Leo's progression was an avalanche. It started with the temperature. I woke up at 3:13 a.m. on a Friday. The heating system in our house was a state-of-the-art smart climate control, set to a constant 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But I woke up seeing my breath. I sat up, shivering. The duvet felt like a sheet of ice. Sarah was fast asleep beside me, curled into a tight ball. I checked the thermostat app on my phone. Internal temp, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Malfunction, I muttered, sliding out of bed. The floor was freezing. I walked into the hallway. The cold wasn't uniform. It was directional. It was flowing like a river of liquid nitrogen from Leo's room. My heart began that familiar, anxious thudding. I moved toward his door, which was slightly ajar. The air grew heavier with every step, thicker, harder to breathe. It wasn't just cold, it was dense. I pushed the door open. Leo was sitting up in bed. The room was dark, lit only by the street lamp outside, casting a pale, unnatural blue square on the carpet. He wasn't screaming. Night terrors usually involve screaming. He was speaking. He was rocking back and forth, a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. His voice was a low, guttural drone. I stepped closer, my bare feet numb on the carpet. Ephatha. Talitha Kumi. Eloi, Eloi. I froze. I am a man of science, but I studied Latin in undergrad. I knew the roots. But this wasn't Latin. It was rougher. More throat-based. It sounded like stones grinding together. Leo? I whispered. He didn't stop. Abba. Abba. I reached out to touch his shoulder to wake him, but stopped inches away. The air around him was vibrating. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean the dust particles in the shaft of light were swirling in a vortex around his bed, moving in a perfect, clockwise spiral. Leo, wake up! I said, louder this time, shaking his shoulder. He stopped rocking. His head snapped toward me with a speed that made my neck ache in sympathy. He looked at me. But he didn't see his father. He looked at me with a mixture of profound pity and devastating sorrow. Why do you doubt? He whispered. The English words felt foreign in his mouth, as if he was translating from a different thought process. You look at the waves and you fear the depth. You have little faith. Leo, you're scaring me. You're sleepwalking. I pulled him into a hug. His body was burning hot. Moments ago the room was freezing, but his skin was radiating a fever heat, at least 103 degrees. Sarah! I yelled. Get the thermometer! And the car keys! We rushed him to the ER. My ER. The place where I was the authority. I bypassed the triage nurse, carrying my son who was now limp and silent. We ran blood work. We did a spinal tap to rule out meningitis. We did a CT scan. I stood in the viewing room, staring at the grayscale slices of my son's brain appearing on the monitors. My colleague, Dr. Aris, stood next to me. Elias, Aris said, folding his arms. This is odd. Is it a tumor? I asked, my voice cracking. Is it swelling? No, Aris said, pointing at the temporal lobe. Look at the activity. He's sedated, Elias. He should be in delta waves. Deep sleep. I leaned in. The screen showed the electrical activity of his brain. It wasn't slow. It was lit up like a Christmas tree. The temporal lobes, the centers for memory and language, were firing at an intensity one had never seen, even in patients having grand mal seizures. But Leo wasn't seizing. He was sleeping. It looks like he's processing, Aris said, baffled. Like he's downloading data. Massive amounts of it. Downloading from where? I snapped. I don't know, Aris admitted. But look at the Broca's area. The language center. It's hyperdeveloped. Elias, looking at this scan, if I didn't know this was a 6-year-old, I'd say this was the brain of a polyglot. Someone who speaks 5, maybe 6 languages fluently. I stared at the screen, at the glowing white storm inside my son's skull. I remembered the words he whispered in the dark. Eloi. Abba. He only speaks English, I said hollowly. He barely passed his reading test last week. The scan says otherwise, Eris said. We took him home when the fever broke as mysteriously as it had arrived. We had no diagnosis. Idiopathic febrile seizure, we wrote on the chart. A placeholder for we don't know. But the real horror started when we got back to the house. I was carrying a sleeping Leo up the stairs when he woke up. He didn't look tired. He looked alert. He pointed at the painting we had in the hallway, a generic, tasteful abstract piece Sarah had bought. Take it down, Leo said. Why? It is wrong, he said firmly. The hill wasn't green. It was brown. And the wood was rough. It scraped the skin. What hill, Leo? He looked at me, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. A tear of anguish that belonged to a grown man, not a child. Golgotha, he whispered. The place of the skull. I almost dropped him. Golgotha. The biblical site of the crucifixion. We are atheists. We don't go to church. We don't own a Bible. Leo has never heard that word in this house. I put him to bed and locked the door. I went to my study, my hands shaking so hard I could barely type. I opened a browser and typed in the phonetics of what he had said earlier. Ephatha. The search results loaded. Aramaic. Meaning, be opened. Spoken by Jesus in the Gospel of Mark to cure a deaf man. I sat back, the darkness of the room pressing in on me. My son wasn't hallucinating. He was quoting scripture in a dead dialect. And he wasn't reading it. He was remembering it. The week that followed was a blur of caffeine and creeping dread. I stopped going to the hospital. I called in sick, a first in my 15-year career. I couldn't leave him. I felt like a sentry guarding a gate that was slowly buckling under the weight of an invisible ocean. Leo's behavior shifted from episodic outbursts to a constant, unnerving presence. He stopped playing video games. He stopped watching cartoons. Instead, he sat by the window, watching the movement of the clouds, his small fingers tracing patterns on the glass that looked suspiciously like constellations. But the breaking point, the moment that shattered my denial into irreparable dust, happened on a Thursday afternoon. I had brought home a book. It was a desperate, irrational purchase from a used bookstore downtown. Daily Life in the Time of Jesus, by a renowned historian. I wanted to catch him. I wanted to prove he had seen this book at school, or at a friend's house. I wanted to prove this was memory, yes, but this life's memory. I sat beside him on the rug. The late afternoon sun was streaming in, turning the dust motes into suspended gold. Leo, I said, opening the book to a glossy illustration of the temple in Jerusalem. Look at this. Is this what you were drawing? Leo looked at the page. His eyes, usually soft, narrowed with an intensity that belonged to a structural engineer, not a first grader. He reached out and tapped the page. No. No? I pointed to the caption. This is the temple. The great temple. The stones are white, Leo whispered, tracing the illustration. But they forgot the smoke. And the noise. The money changers sat here. He pointed to a specific section of the court of the Gentiles. And this gate. He tapped the beautiful gate illustrated in gold leaf. It wasn't gold. It was Corinthian bronze. It shone like fire when the sun hit it in the morning. It hurt your eyes. I froze. Corinthian bronze. That was a specific metallurgical detail. How do you know that, Leo? He looked up at me, and for the first time, he looked frightened. Not of what he knew, but of my reaction. Because I walked through it, Daddy. With him. With who? The teacher, he said softly. Before they took him. Before the garden. He suddenly grabbed a black marker and began drawing fiercely over the expensive book. He didn't scribble. He corrected. He drew lines connecting the pillars, sketching a ventilation system for the sacrificial smoke that historians had debated for centuries. I watched his hand. It wasn't the clumsy grip of a child. It was the precise, flowing stroke of a draftsman. I stood up, backing away until my back hit the bookshelf. My breathing was shallow. The air in the room felt electrified, smelling faintly of ozone and olives. Crushed olives. I couldn't handle this alone anymore. I needed science. But not medical science. I needed someone who knew the past. I grabbed my phone and dialed Dr. Elias Thorne. Elias, I said, my voice trembling. I need the number for that linguistics professor you dated. The one from the Semitic languages department. Al-Fayed. Elias? You sound manic. What's going on? Just give me the number, Elias. I think my son is speaking a dead language. Professor Amir Al-Fayed was a man who looked like he was carved from the very parchment he studied. He was in his 60s, with skin the color of walnut and eyes that held the sharp, assessing gaze of a hawk. He smelled of tobacco and old libraries. I had bribed him to come. I told him I had a patient with a rare form of glossolalia, speaking in tongues that mimicked ancient syntax. He was skeptical, but the promise of a unique case study lured him to our glass fortress by the sound. It was Saturday morning. Rain again. Always rain. We sat in the living room. Sarah was in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself, looking pale. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. Leo was sitting on the floor, building a tower with wooden blocks. So, Professor Al-Fayed said, setting down a heavy audio recorder. This is the subject? His name is Leo, Sarah said sharply. He's a boy, not a subject. Apologies, Al-Fayed nodded. He turned to me. Dr. Thorne, glossolalia is usually gibberish. It mimics the rhythm of language but lacks syntax, grammar, or vocabulary. You claim he speaks Aramaic? I don't claim anything, I said, rubbing my temples. I just know what I heard. Al-Fayed leaned forward, clasping his hands. He spoke to Leo, his voice gentle but probing. Shlama, Leo. Tabe? Peace, Leo. Are you well? Leo didn't look up from his blocks. He placed a square block on top of a cylinder. Al-Fayed looked at me with a raised eyebrow. Nothing. As I suspect. Suddenly, Leo's hand stopped. He didn't turn around. He spoke to the blocks. La Tabe. Hayoma Karaira. Al-Fayed froze. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The dismissive look on his face vanished, replaced by a shock so pure it was almost comical. What did he say? Sarah whispered. Al-Fayed ignored her. He leaned closer, his movements urgent now. He switched dialects, speaking faster, more complex sentences. Man hu abuk? Min ein eight? Who is your father? Where are you from? Leo turned around then. He looked at the professor with that same ancient, pitying gaze he had given me. La min harka, Leo said. His voice dropped an octave, resonating in his chest. Anna min Galila. Min kfar Nahum. The professor gasped. He actually recoiled, knocking his notepad off the coffee table. My God! Al-Fayed whispered. What? I demanded. What did he say? Al-Fayed turned to me, his face pale beneath his dark complexion. I asked him where he is from. He said, I am not from here. I am from Galilee. From Capernaum. Capernaum? Sarah asked. The biblical city? Yes, Al-Fayed said, his hands shaking as he reached for his recorder. But Dr. Thorne, it is not just the words. It is the accent. The accent? We reconstruct ancient languages based on written texts, Al-Fayed explained, his voice racing. We guess at the vowels. We guess at the cadence. But this... He gestured helplessly at Leo. This is a Galilean rural dialect from the 1st century. It is the dialect of fishermen. Of peasants. It has guttural stops that died out 2,000 years ago. No scholar speaks like this. It's impossible to fake. It's like hearing a fossil breathe. The room fell silent. The only sound was the rain against the glass and the soft click-clack of Leo stacking another block. Ask him, I said, my voice feeling like it was coming from underwater. Ask him about the drawing. Ask him about the man. Al-Fayed nodded. He took a deep breath, composing himself like a man stepping onto holy ground. Leo, he said in English, testing the waters. Tell us about the teacher. Did you know Yeshua? Leo stopped moving. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air pressure dropped. My ears popped. The smell returned, stronger this time. Not just fish and wood, but something sweeter. Spikenard. Expensive perfume oil. Leo looked at Al-Fayed. Tears began to pool in his eyes. He called me Elian, Leo whispered. I was the son of the net mender. What did he look like? Al-Fayed asked, his voice trembling. Leo smiled. A smile of heartbreaking beauty. He looked like rest. Leo closed his eyes. He stood on the shore. The crowd was pushing. So many people. They wanted to touch him. They wanted magic. But he just wanted to teach. Leo stood up. He walked to the center of the rug. He wasn't looking at us anymore. He was looking at a shoreline only he could see. He got into the boat. Leo narrated, acting it out. My father's boat. He asked to push out a little from the land, so the water would carry his voice. Leo raised his hand, mimicking a gesture of blessing. Then he began to speak. Not a sentence. A speech. He spoke for 5 minutes without pausing for breath. It was a stream of fluid, rhythmic Aramaic. It rose and fell like waves. It was poetry. It was authority. Professor Al-Fayed was weeping. Silent tears were streaming down his face, soaking into his tweed jacket. He wasn't taking notes. He was just listening, his mouth covered by his hand. When Leo finished, he collapsed onto the rug, instantly asleep. I rushed to him, checking his pulse. It was racing, but strong. I looked at Al-Fayed. The professor was staring at the wall, stunned. What was that? I asked. What did he say? Al-Fayed looked at me, his eyes wide with terror and awe. That, Al-Fayed whispered, was the Sermon on the Mount. But not the version we have. What do you mean? The Gospels. Matthew, Luke, they are summaries. Memories written down decades later. They are fragments. Al-Fayed pointed a shaking finger at my sleeping son. What he just said, it was the whole thing. There were parables I have never heard. Metaphors about salt and light that make the Greek translations look like shadows. He looked at me, dead in the eye. Dr. Thorne, your son didn't memorize scripture. He was there. The silence in the room following the professor's declaration was heavy, physical. It felt like the air pressure before a tornado touches down. He was there. Al-Fayed repeated, his voice barely audible. That's impossible. I snapped, the scientist in me fighting a losing battle against the evidence of my own ears. It's genetic memory. Maybe? Or some kind of quantum non-locality. He's tapping into a field of information. But he wasn't there. He's 6 years old. He was born at Seattle Grace Hospital. Al-Fayed stood up, wiping his face with a handkerchief. He looked aged, shaken. Dr. Thorne, science explains how. It rarely explains why. Your son just recited a liturgy that predates the written Gospels by 40 years. He used idioms that only existed in a 10-mile radius of the Sea of Galilee between 20 and 30 AD. Suddenly, Leo stirred on the rug. He didn't wake up fully. He rolled onto his side, his eyes fluttering rapidly beneath the lids. The coin, Leo mumbled. We both froze. What coin? I asked, kneeling beside him. The silver one, Leo whispered, his eyes still closed. It fell. Into the gap. Between the ribs of the boat. Under the seat where the teacher Saturday. Al-Fayed moved closer, his recorder thrust forward. Which boat, Elian? Peter's boat? Yes, Leo sighed. The hole was cracked. My father tried to fix it with pitch. But the coin, it slipped. A Tyrian shekel. With the eagle on it. Alphayed gasped sharply. He scrambled for his phone. What year? What year is this memory from? The year of the drought, Leo murmured. Before the Romans burned the olive groves. Alphayed was already dialing. His hands were shaking so hard he mistyped the number twice. He put the phone on speaker. The ringtone echoed in the quiet room, a stark, digital intrusion into the ancient atmosphere. Who are you calling? Sarah asked, her voice brittle. The Israel Antiquities Authority, Alphayed hissed. My colleague Dr. Levi. They are excavating the Jesus boat site at Genosar right now. They found a new hull fragment last week. The phone clicked. A groggy voice answered. Amir? It is 3 a.m. here. What is it? Yossi, listen to me, Alphayed said, his voice urgent. The hull fragment you found. The one from the 1st century fishing vessel. Have you cleaned it yet? We are starting tomorrow. Why? Check the ribs, Alphayed commanded. Specifically, the gap under the stern seat. The 3rd rib from the back. Amir, are you drunk? Check it. Now. I am on a video call. Show me. There was a grumbling on the other end, the sound of a flashlight clicking on, and the rustle of plastic tarps. The video feed on Alphayed's phone flickered to life. It showed a dark excavation tent, lit by a harsh LED work light. We saw the preserved, skeletal remains of ancient wood, dark with mud and time. I am looking, Dr. Levi muttered. It is just mud, Amir. Compacted sediment. Dig, Alphayed said. Gently. I watched the small screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I saw Dr. Levi's hand, holding a small trowel, scraping away the caked mud from the ancient wood. Scrape. Scrape. There is something hard here, Levi said, his voice changing pitch. He switched to a brush. He brushed away 2,000 years of silt. A glint. A dull, silver glint. On the screen, Dr. Levi stopped breathing. He reached in with tweezers and pulled out a small, round object. He held it up to the light. It was a coin. By Yahweh, Levi whispered. It is a Tyrian shekel. Flip it, Alphayed ordered, tears streaming down his face again. Is there an eagle? Levi flipped the coin. Even through the pixelated video, the image was clear. An eagle. How did you know? Levi shouted into the phone. We haven't told a soul we found this boat section. How did you know? Alphayed ended the call. He slowly lowered the phone. He looked at me. Your son, he whispered, remembered where he dropped his pocket money. 2,000 years ago. I looked at Leo. He was sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling. The glass wall of my skepticism didn't just crack. It shattered. It fell away, leaving me standing exposed in a universe much larger, and much stranger, than I had ever dared to imagine. The storm outside intensified as evening fell. The rain was no longer just rain, it was a deluge, a biblical washing of the world. The power flickered then died. The house plunged into darkness, save for the lightning flashes that illuminated the room in strobe light bursts. We sat in the dark. Me, Sarah, Alphayed, and Leo. Leo woke up at 8 p.m. This time, there was no transition. He didn't stretch or rub his eyes. He simply sat up on the sofa and looked at us. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The air became charged, static raising the hair on my arms. The smell of the sea was gone. It was replaced by something else, the smell of stone, cool and subterranean. A tomb? No. A cave. Dad, Leo said. But it wasn't Leo. The voice was clear. It wasn't the guttural Aramaic anymore. It was English, but spoken with a cadence that felt ancient, patient, and infinitely weary. Leo? I asked, my voice trembling. He is sleeping, the voice said through my son's mouth. I am borrowing the vessel for a moment. The connection is thinning. The door is closing. Sarah sobbed, covering her mouth. I reached for her hand, gripping it hard. Who are you? Alphayet asked, leaning forward into the darkness. Are you Elian? The boy smiled. It was a smile of a man who has seen empires rise and fall. I was Elian, he said. I was the boy who watched. I saw the nails. I saw the empty linen. I carried the memory because the world forgot. He turned his gaze to me. In the flashes of lightning, his eyes seemed to hold the weight of galaxies. Elias, he said. My name. Yes? You study the brain, the boy said. You look for the soul in the wiring. You think that when the wiring breaks, the signal ends. Yes, I whispered. That is what I know. You are wrong, he said gently. The radio breaks. The signal remains. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the raging storm. I have a message, he said. Not for the world. The world is not ready to listen. It is too loud. The message is for you. For the doubters. For the men who measure the wind but do not feel it. He turned back to us. He told me to tell you, the boy said, referring to the teacher, that death is not a wall. It is a horizon. You think you are biological machines, brief sparks in a cold dark. But you are not. He walked over to me and placed a small hand on my chest, right over my heart. His hand was warm. Love is not a chemical reaction, Elias. It is the only thing that is real. It is the bridge. That is why I came back. That is why I remembered. To tell you that nothing is lost. Every laugh, every tear, every touch, it is all recorded. It is all kept. Where? I choked out, tears finally spilling over. Where is it kept? In the mind of God, he whispered. Which is what you are living in. The lights in the house flickered. A low hum began to build, a vibration that rattled the window panes. I have to go now, the boy said. Elian is tired. He needs to just be Leo now. The memory is heavy. It is time to put it down. Wait, Alphayet cried out. One question. The resurrection. Did you see it? Did you see him rise? Leo paused. He looked at the professor with a look of infinite kindness. Professor, he said softly, I didn't see him rise. I saw him never die. The lightning struck close to the house, a blinding flash of white light that turned the room into a photo negative. The thunderclap was deafening. In that flash, for 1 microsecond, I didn't see my 6-year-old son standing there. I saw a man. A young man in rough, woven clothes, smelling of fish and salt, standing on a dusty road, his hand raised in farewell. Then the darkness returned. Daddy? The voice was high. Nasal. Whiny. The lights flickered back on. Leo was standing in the middle of the room, rubbing his eyes. He looked around, confused. Daddy, why is it dark? Can I have some juice? I fell to my knees and hugged him. I hugged him harder than I had ever hugged anything in my life. I sobbed into his rocket ship pajamas. Yes, Leo, I wept. Yes, you can have juice. You can have anything you want. Alphayet sat in the chair, his head bowed, the recorder in his hand still running, capturing only the sound of a father crying and the rain, finally, beginning to slow. Epilogue. We never spoke of it again. Not really. Leo grew up. The memories faded, just like he said they would. By the time he was 10, he didn't remember the boat, or the coin, or the Aramaic words. He became a normal boy who liked soccer and video games. But I changed. I still work as a neurologist. I still look at MRI scans. But now, when I look at the electrical storms inside the human brain, I don't just see biology. I don't just see chemistry. I see the radio. And I know, with a certainty that defies all peer-reviewed papers, that the signal is out there. And sometimes, when the wind blows from the east, and the air smells faintly of salt and ancient dust, I close my eyes. And I can almost hear the sound of a boat, pushing out into the deep water, carrying a voice that will never, ever die.